Andy Johnson. This is the Reading Instruction Show, and today we are talking about multisensory instruction. Multisensory instruction is one of these things that's being mandated by a lot of states based on lobbying efforts by the International Dyslexia Association. And generally what they mean here is you need to use orton-Gillingham or some other structured program that's scripted. Now, here's the thing about it. There's no research, valid research, to support the use or the effectiveness of orton-Gillingham as far as its long-term impact on students' ability to create meaning with print. Yes, you get a short-term bump in scores, but there's nothing to indicate that these scores transfer to authentic reading situations or enhance students' ability to create meaning to comprehend. And that's why we read, isn't it? Anyway, multisensory instruction is what we call multimodal instruction. It's including physical, auditory, and kinesthetic modalities. And we've been doing this in elementary ed for years. Didn't need to buy no fancy programs. Now, in a meaning-based approach to reading interventions, not only is it multisensory and multimodal, but it's meta-multimodal or mega-multimodal, however you want to describe it. That means as you're reading, children see things, or as instruction is occurring, we want students to see things, visual, hear things, auditory, do things, kinesthetic, but also to imagine things, to emote things, to communicate things, to talk about things, and to think about things. We want all these modalities included in a reading instruction or a meaning-based reading intervention. That's why I call it meta-multimodal, sometimes mega-multimodal. Now, we are going to look at, I am going to show you 21 multimodal strategies. Now, you didn't have to pay me $2,000 to take some class, as some approaches are wont to do. You don't have to be specially trained. There's no super secret strategies here. Specially trained. Students aren't going to blow up if you don't get it just right. Here are strategies. Adopt and adapt using multimodal. And the first one is simple letter patterns or word tracing in the air, in the sand, on paper. They hear the word, they see the word, and they trace the word. Multimodality, nothing complicated there. Word building, onset rhymes. You see the word in the context of the sentence first, then you see parts of the word, you have anagrams, and here you have your onsets and rhymes, and then you put the words back together again. You see, you hear, you manipulate. Sentence strips with sight words. Sight words, you want students to recognize them instantly and automatically. First, you go over them. You can trace them if you want, but I like to use 3 to 5 sight words at a time when I use sight word strips. Then I present sentences, and I like to use a screen device here. The cat is here. So they see it, they hear it as we read it aloud together, or I read it aloud. And then I have students point to the sight word. They each have a sentence strip in front of them on their desk or on the computer, and they simply point to it, and then they are reinforced. So what I like to do is have the same 5 sight words and present about 10 sentences real quickly. All of these activities take between 2 to 8 minutes or so. They're multimodal. It's one part of a reading intervention. Sentence strips are another one. This is called Be the Word. You record a sentence on a sentence strip, just like that. Now, this sentence could come from a student's language experience. You could write it based on a book, or write it based on something that's occurring in the classroom or in students' lives. You then cut the sentence into words, hand different students individual words. They stand up and they have to organize themselves into a sentence that makes sense. Now, you can sometimes mix them up and have them find their way. And when you tap them on the head, they say their word. So they get to see if the sentence makes sense at the end. That's called meta cognition. And it's kind of fun to mix them up on purpose and say the incorrect sentence, the silly sentence that's created. And you can save these in an envelope and use the same ones on later days. But when they're done doing it, I have students then hand their word to another student. So this is a small group or a large group activity. Hand them to another student who's sitting down or another student in the group. Multimodality. They see the word as we write, they hear the word as we read it together, and then they are manipulating as they move around with their bodies. Sentence mix-up strip. Again, find a sentence related to the story, students' lives, or sometimes if you want to reinforce a letter pattern. Maybe I'm looking at short A words or the CH blend at the beginning, so I'll include a sentence that has those. Have the sentence, cut it up into words, mix it up. Students rearrange it so that it makes sense, They put them back to order. And you see the little timer here. Sometimes what I like to do is see if they can get faster, 2 or 3 times, see if they can see their times getting better. And I save these for another day. Sometimes if each student has a sentence, sometimes they get up and move to the next desk so they can practice doing 2 or 3 of these in a single day. You're limited only by your imagination and how you use these. Ooh, letter bodies are good. This works with primary age students, kindergarten to 1st grade, maybe 2nd grade. Students see or hear a word, see a word, you read it out loud, and they make their bodies the shape of the letter. For example, if we're looking at vowel sounds, short A word, they have a short A shape with their body. So obviously they are standing up to make their bodies the shape of the word. And this is kind of fun if you have an I shape, because you can actually create dances based on letter patterns. You could have a pan, 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 sit, sit, sit. So they're moving into letter patterns on the shape or on the timing of the music. And again, you're limited only by your imagination here. Letter bodies to create words. Oh, this is a fun game. Give students a word, a group of students, 3 or 4. They have to organize or put their bodies to spell the word, and other students have to guess the word. All right, that is a fun activity to use as well to reinforce letter patterns or sounds, limited only by your imagination. Talking word parts. This is a phonemic awareness activity. It's done in groups. Give a small group of students a word. Each has their part of the word, their phoneme underlined, make sure they know it. Tap each person, and as you tap them, they say or pronounce just their phoneme, and see if the group can understand what the word is. D, O, G, D, O, G, and see if others can guess what the word is. Fun word, having fun. Fun is fun. Word sorts, inductive analysis. Oh, word sorts are always great. Inductive analysis, discovery learning is a powerful way to learn. A lot of variations, but you have words on a card. I like working in groups here. Pairs is great. Read the individual words together, and students have to create groups based on the letter patterns. Now you can mix and match, and after you've done a few, there's different letter patterns. Can you arrange it another way? Do you see different groups? It gets students noticing letter patterns and moving the words around, so they're kinesthetically involved as well. Sometimes they group them for meaning as well. Now, if you really want to be creative, and you do, sometimes you'll find words based on stories that students are reading or about to read, or words related to a science or social studies unit. And again, you're limited only by your imagination for this multisensory, multimodal, meta-multimodal activity. Thumbs up. Simple one. You're reading a big book or a book on a screen. You're pointing to the words. This is done in large group or small group, but the students need to see the text as you are reading it out loud, and you are asking them to notice words with a specific letter pattern. Boys and girls, today we're looking at the blah, blah, blend. Thumbs up or hands up when you see a word. When I read that word, All right, simple way to get them engaged. And if it's a good story, their emotions and their imaginations are engaged as well. That's a variation of thumbs up. It can be done a lot of different ways. The neurological impress method, or scaffolded oral reading, that has been identified as a multisensory activity. And here's how it works. It's done a lot of different ways. The child and the student reads the book together. Now, I don't like this. It's in this day and age, it's a little too close, but something like that can be used. As you're reading it together, sometimes the student puts his or her hand on top of the teacher's hand and they're reading it out loud together. Now, the teacher is keeping just a millisecond ahead of the student, all right? It's keeping the pace moving. So they're seeing the word, they're hearing the word, and they're moving their finger along with the word. Now, another variation, when I do it, and there's me, I just sit side by side and I point to the word and just keep it moving a little bit. I use this quite a bit. This is one way to do it, where the student can actually put his or her hand on top of yours, or simply follow along as you're watching. I tend to prefer that one. All right, neurological impress method, or scaffolded oral reading. I have a little variation that I use there that I call it SCORE. Oh, inquiry is great. You read a book together, all right, and then you give students target letter sounds or patterns, and they go back and they have to find the words that have these. So they're hearing, they're seeing, and they're actually writing it down. Or if sometimes I just have them put tally marks instead when they encounter a word, then you can create graphs related to that. But that's inquiry. I wonder how many short I words there are in this story. I wonder how many ly endings there are in this story. And of course, adapt can be done kindergarten level up to grade 3 or 4. However, inquiry, ask a question, collect data to answer the question. Here's another good one, replay analysis. You give students 3 to 6 sentences to read. Sentences can have a target letter sound or pattern if you want. These sentences are used to reinforce the short A. They all have a short A in them someplace. Students read the sentences into an audio recorder. They listen back and they underline any of the stumble words. They go back and they read it again until there are no stumble words. And this can be done in pairs sometimes, where one is the recorder and listener and the other is the reader. But this gets them, again, reading, listening, underlining, kinesthetic, all modalities. And if you're working with another student, they are listening and communicating as well. And what you do then is you reread until fluency is achieved, until you have no stumble words. I start with 3. You can go all the way up to 6, depending on the age and ability of the student. Keyboarding is a multimodal activity. They are given a sentence to read, and they have to feel the word. They have to actually plug in the letters. Now, I like to use color-coded keyboards to make it easier for students to find the keys as they're writing. I sometimes dictate simple sentences based on a letter sound or pattern I'm trying to reinforce, or maybe a sentence related to a story that students are reading. Try to make it meaningful when at all possible. Now, here's a trick I learned as well. When students are writing a sentence and they're looking for the keys, because they're at varying levels, I never press the key for them, but I'll point to the general area where the key is. Okay, letter to sound and text to speech software. Letter to sound is, you have software that it makes the sound of the letter when you press it, and you put the letters together, and when the word is created, it creates the actual word. It says the word out loud, and students can then hear the sentence played back as well. That's letter to sound. And text to speech software is where you speak into the computer, and then it records exactly what you say on the screen. And most computer software programs most computers come with software that have this text-to-speech software in them. I know my computer has it, didn't ask for it, but it's very handy for students. When I'm using it with younger students or struggling students, of course, I want them to be directly in front of the screen and see the words coming as they say them, using 24-point font usually. And it depends, but I like them to be big enough so they can actually see it. In the same way, speech-to-text software. That is when speech-to-text, oh, you say it and then it write it. I just did speech-to-text. What I meant is text-to-speech, that as you write, then it reads it back to you. You know what I'm trying to say. They have both speech-to-text, where you say it, it comes on the screen, and text-to-speech. When you write it, it says it back to you. And by the way, this text-to-speech, I use it a lot as a writer myself. When I'm writing stuff, I want it read back so I get a sense of the sound. It's a very handy tool to use for writers of any age. Which word doesn't look right? This is a great activity. The teacher dictates 1 to 3 sentences. Now, the sentences can contain the target letter pattern or sound if you want, if you're focusing on short A sentences. After each sentence, I usually have no more than 3 sentences, sometimes 4. But after each sentence, you stop and you say, which word doesn't look right? I ask students to underline, and about 98% of the time, they know which word doesn't look right. Then I show them the complete sentence with correct spelling. If I'm using small groups and working in groups of 2, I will have the sentence on the screen, or sometimes if they're working with a partner, the partner can show them the complete sentence. They make the correction by crossing out the incorrectly spelled word and writing the correct spelling on top. I do this because I want them to see the before and after. I don't want them to erase, simply put a line through the word that's incorrectly spelled, and the correct spelling is then written on top. When they complete the 3 sentences, they reread until fluency is achieved. And I like working with buddies, if you have a bunch of them, because one can be the teacher that says, that dictates, and the other students write it down, and then can check at the end. And of course, reading good books, it's multimodal because you're seeing, you're imagining, you're feeling, you're emoting. All right, and reading good books, that involves teacher read-alouds as well, or reading to students so they are engaged in the language. Authentic writing, where students are writing their thoughts, their ideas. They're describing what they experienced. And again, you can use the computer. They can see the words underlined that's not correctly spelled right, and the computer then can read it aloud. But authentic writing activity is where they're writing to express their ideas, not a cute story starter, but their ideas. So reading good books and authentic writing. Connecting books to students' lives, all right? You're reading a book as a teacher read aloud or together or by themselves, and you're looking for either pre-reading activities or during that connects to students' lives or experiences somehow. And that's where teacher expertise, knowledge, intelligence, and creativity comes into the foreplay. Structure conversations around good books. You structure these conversations, you plan them ahead, either in small groups or in large groups, so you can discuss a story as you're reading or after reading. And anything that gets students talking together in pairs and small groups is good. And of course, book talks. Book talk is where a student simply identifies a book he or she likes. Here's Stuart Little. Tells why they like it, and the other classmates get to hear it and go, oh, I think I would like that book. Of course, there's other things, but these are just some of the ideas, so you get it for a multi-sensory type of activities that involve different modalities, that involve seeing, hearing, the kinesthetic modality, but we like multimodal strategies that also involve emoting, sharing, imagining, talking, and listening. multimodal instruction or multisensory instruction is simply one part of an intervention or reading instruction. Now, the thing about this multisensory, it gets students focusing on letter patterns and sounds. So this should be one part because you want them ultimately to be focusing on creating meaning and not letter patterns and sounds. So this is one part. All right. There are no super secret special strategies that only specially trained people can use. There are magic teachers who have knowledge, expertise, and creativity that are designing activities based on their students' needs.